In a world where every artist is screaming for your attention and hoping you don't notice the empty seats behind them, Drake is doing something that has never happened at this scale in his entire two-decade run. He is going silent. He is going ghost. He is standing on top of an album that his most loyal supporters have been begging to hear live, and instead of giving them a single date, a single city, a single arena, a single flicker of hope on a calendar, he is letting the clock rot. And the longer the clock rots, the louder his own fan base is starting to sound like the people who used to hate him. Picture this for a second, because it is genuinely wild. It has been over a month since the Iceman album landed. Over a month of screenshots, snippets, memes, hot takes, defenders, deniers, and everything in between. Over a month of grown adults on the internet publicly begging a Canadian billionaire to please just tell them where to send their money. And Drake, the same Drake who used to announce a tour before the album was even mixed, has not opened his mouth. Not a whisper. Not a leak. Not a Ticketmaster teaser. Not a single Miami date. Not a Toronto homecoming. Not a New York night. Nothing. And that silence, that pin drop nothing, is starting to sound louder than any diss track Kendrick Lamar could ever write against him. Now, before we peel this entire situation open the way it deserves to be peeled open, I need everybody watching to do me one small solid. Hit that subscribe button. Turn the notification bell on. Because what we are about to walk through is the exact kind of coverage the algorithm tries to bury. This channel does not get spoon-fed by publicists. This channel does not read press releases. This channel goes to war with the story. So if that sounds like your kind of energy, lock in with me right now, because we are only just getting started, and the deeper we go, the messier this Iceman rollout is going to look. Try wrapping your head around this. Drake, the most streamed artist on the planet, the man who supposedly commands more replay value per second than any human being currently walking the earth, has not confirmed a single stop on a North American tour for an album that was pitched as the crown jewel of his post-beef comeback. Every other name in the building is out on the road. Kehlani sold her run. Doja Cat sold her run. Bryson Tiller uncorked a brand new project and is already lining up dates. Chris Brown and Usher are moving stadium numbers side by side. Lil Wayne is out there right now. The Weeknd, Drake's own hometown brother, packed out Hard Rock Stadium with over 100,000 seats and made it look effortless. And Drake, the guy whose fans literally flew across the ocean to London last summer because he refused to come to their American cities, is somehow still refusing to come to their American cities. It is bordering on comedy at this point. It is bordering on cruelty at this point. Because these are the people who defended him when the world was in the streets, calling him a certified anything you can imagine. These are the people who typed paragraphs on his behalf while the internet was building bonfires. And this is how Drake is choosing to thank them. With silence. With a Sexy Songs for You non-tour that never was. With an Iceman drought that keeps stretching. With a Macho Man cut nobody has ever heard live and probably never will. And you can hear it now on every timeline in real time. The Drake fans are cracking. Zooming out for a beat, because I want to make sure everybody understands the temperature in the room. Real Drake fans, the ones who never left, the ones who sat through Honestly, Nevermind and defended the house cuts, the ones who bought For All the Dogs vinyl and streamed 100 gigs like it was a full body of work, are publicly begging him to tour. They are logging on saying, out loud, in captions, in comments, in podcast rants, that they will pay $300, $400, $800, $900, whatever the number is, to sit in whatever seat is available. They're saying they will fly. They're saying they will drive. They're saying if the Iceman tour lands on their wedding day, they will show up in a tux and forget the vows. And the reason that is such a wild energy to sit with is because that level of parasocial devotion is exactly what Drake built his empire on. He engineered it. He cultivated it. He curated the most emotionally invested fan base in modern rap. And now, at the peak moment where he needs to cash that investment out, he is standing at the register with his hands in his pockets. Peel one layer back and look at what is actually happening behind the curtain. There are two possibilities, and neither of them looks flattering for Drake. Possibility 1. Drake genuinely does not have a tour ready to announce because the Iceman rollout is falling apart internally. That is the version where OVO has been miscalculating demand ever since the Kendrick Lamar exchange changed the temperature of his fanbase. That is the version where Live Nation and Ticketmaster ran the pre-projections, looked at the data, and quietly told Drake that a full stadium run is not the number he thinks it is. That is the version where Drake, who used to walk into arenas like a coronation, is now being asked to justify a $200 minimum ticket in a post-not-like-us environment. And that, if it is true, is one of the most humbling business conversations Drake will ever have had to sit through in his life. Possibility 2, and this is the one his fans are terrified of, Drake is deliberately withholding the tour because he does not trust his own audience anymore. Think about that. Think about how deep that paranoia would have to run for the most streamed artist in the world to look at a stadium of screaming fans and see potential threats. Because remember, Kendrick Lamar sold out a full stadium tour with SZA. That is documented. That is signed, sealed, and etched into the concert record books. That is a fact Drake wakes up to every morning whether he acknowledges it or not. Kendrick did stadiums. Drake, historically, has done arenas. Big arenas, sold-out arenas, respectable arenas, but arenas nonetheless. And now Drake sits in front of a rollout where the entire culture is measuring him against a scoreboard he did not agree to be measured on, and the smart bet, if you were his manager, would be to stick to the safe ground. Stick to the arenas. Stick to the tier he has always dominated. But that is not what an artist with a bruised ego does. An artist with a bruised ego either overreaches and books a stadium he cannot fill, or freezes entirely and books nothing at all. And guess which one Drake looks like right now? Off the record. And I mean genuinely off the record, because industry sources have been whispering about this for weeks. There is a very real conversation happening at OVO about whether Drake can headline a 100,000-seat venue by himself. Not with a future co-headline. Not with a Baby Keem opening slot he burned that bridge on. Not with a Nicki Minaj feature he burned that bridge on. Not with a Rihanna surprise because that ship sailed years ago. By himself. Just Drake. Just the Iceman branding. Just the merch. Just the classics and the deep cuts and the radio hits, and hoping to God the crowd sings every word. And when you actually run those numbers, when you actually look at who is still cool with Drake in a way that translates into stadium ticket velocity, the list is embarrassingly short. Because Kendrick has SZA. Kendrick has 21 Savage. Kendrick has an entire PG Lang universe of artists ready to move in formation with him. Drake has who exactly? Tyga? Party Next Door? Baka? A Birdman drop-in for the culture? None of that moves stadium tickets. None of that moves 55,000-seat queues. None of that moves the actual needle. And Drake knows it. That is why the announcement has not come. Because Drake, deep down, is doing the math, and the math is not lying to him the way his defenders on the internet are lying to him. And when the smoke clears on this rollout, I think a lot of people are going to look back at this exact stretch, this weird, quiet, ghostly month after the Iceman drop, and realize this was the tell. This was the moment the mask slipped. Because for years Drake has weaponized silence like a magician weaponizes misdirection. He goes quiet, the internet fills the vacuum with speculation, and then he swoops back in with a moment that resets the conversation. That is the Drake playbook. It has worked for over a decade. But this silence, this Iceman silence, feels different. This silence feels like a man who does not have a magic trick ready. This silence feels like a man staring at a spreadsheet. This silence feels like a man who used to walk into a room knowing every eye was on him and now walks into the same room wondering how many of those eyes have quietly drifted to Kendrick, to SZA, to Sexy Red, to Sabrina Carpenter, to any of the artists eating in his lane while he blinks in slow motion. Now, I need to introduce a wrinkle that not enough people are talking about, and I promise you this is where the whole picture starts to click. Drake has a boycott problem. His fans, particularly his American fans, are still bruised from being passed over during the last touring cycle. That is not internet noise. That is documented sentiment. Real American Drake fans, and I mean the ones who bought his early mixtapes when he was still a kid in a Toronto basement, feel skipped. They watched him do It Was All a Blur, They watched him extend it. They watched him fly to Australia. They watched him fly to Europe. They watched him play London 3 nights in a row for people who barely understood the Toronto slang he was rapping in. And they sat in the United States wondering why the man who built his entire mythology off American cities was suddenly treating American cities like an afterthought. And now, with Iceman out, with the entire narrative of the album pointing toward reconquering the domestic conversation, Drake has once again gone silent on when he will come to the country that made him. If that silence lasts one more week, the boycott chatter is going to metastasize from Twitter jokes into a real cultural rejection. And this time, unlike last time, Kendrick has already given his audience a permission slip to move on. Living the sermon he has been selling for years, Kendrick Lamar is out here doing the exact opposite of what Drake is doing. Kendrick announces, Kendrick delivers, Kendrick executes. Kendrick moved from the Super Bowl into a fully sold grand national tour, into new business ventures, into NBA partnerships, without breaking stride, without leaking, without begging for attention. Without any of the theatrical drought, Drake has weaponized his entire career. Kendrick is dialed in. Kendrick is zeroed in. Kendrick is treating his rollout like a chess grandmaster who already knows what move you are going to make 3 turns from now. And Drake, meanwhile, is playing checkers with his own audience, hoping they do not notice he moved the same piece twice. And the receipts are already sitting on the table, right in front of anybody willing to look. Look at how Drake has structured his entire post-Iceman press cycle. There is no press cycle. There are no sit-down interviews with meaningful outlets. There is no strategic magazine cover. There is no long-form conversation about the making of the album. There is no documentary rollout. There is no visual companion piece the way Kendrick had the pop out. There is no cinematic moment. There is no cultural anchor. There is just Drake on Instagram in a bathrobe, mumbling into his phone camera about his fans while the rest of the industry moves without him. And the people who love Drake the most, the ones who defend him the hardest, are starting to whisper the one word that has never been associated with him in a positive way. Cooked. They are whispering it in group chats. They are whispering it in comment sections. They are whispering it under their breath. Not because they want it to be true. Because they can feel it becoming true. Try wrapping your head around the sexy songs for you situation for a second, because this is honestly the part that breaks people. That album was pitched as a full-body R&B statement. It was pitched as a chapter of Drake nobody had seen before. Fans were told, implicitly and explicitly, that there would be a sexy songs for you tour. There would be intimate rooms, romantic set lists, candlelit visuals, the whole aesthetic. And that tour never came. It never happened. It vaporized. It became a rumor and then a memory and then a punchline. And now Drake is asking those same fans to trust him with Iceman dates. He is asking them to save their money for a tour he has not confirmed for an album that already came and went. He is asking them to believe him. Again. And the internet, the real internet, the fans, the people, the culture is finally starting to ask the question that has been sitting in the back of the room for years. What if Drake does not actually want to tour anymore? What if the guy who built his entire fortune off of live performance and merch and city-to-city devotion has quietly decided that touring is not worth it for him anymore, and he is too proud to say it out loud? Because if that is what is happening, then this Iceman drought is not a delay. This Iceman drought is a permanent condition. Step back from the noise for a moment and think about what it actually means for the biggest streaming artist on the planet to be scared of an arena. And I do mean scared. Because there is no other word for a man who sits on Iceman for a full month and refuses to announce a domestic tour when every competitor in his lane is booked, packed, and rolling. Fear. Fear of not selling out. Fear of a viral empty seat video going nuclear on TikTok. Fear of the front row being full of ironic attendees waiting to yell Kendrick lyrics between his songs. Fear of the crowd being smaller than the room. Fear of having to defend the size of that crowd in a Twitter Spaces the morning after. Fear of being reduced from a headliner to a discussion. And that fear, if it is real, is the most damaging emotion a superstar of Drake's tier can ever expose. Because the moment the culture smells fear on a rapper, the culture eats. And right now, the culture is starting to sniff. And here is where it gets darker, because we haven't even talked about the money yet. Drake tours are expensive to run. Iceman staging, if it is going to match the branding of the album, is going to require snow effects, cold tone production, an entire visual identity that costs millions of dollars to build out before the first ticket is even sold. That kind of production works when you know your ticket velocity is going to justify it. That kind of production is a nightmare when demand is soft. And demand, whether a VO wants to admit it publicly or not, is soft in a way it has never been soft for Drake before. That does not mean nobody wants to see him. That means the price ceiling has cracked. That means the $2,000 VIP packages he used to move in his sleep are now sitting on resale sites at a discount. That means Ticketmaster's dynamic pricing algorithm, the same algorithm that has protected Drake tours for a decade, no longer has the raw appetite to work in his favor the way it used to. And when the algorithm stops rescuing you, you either accept smaller rooms or you disappear from the road entirely. Guess which one Drake's ego is willing to accept. Now, I want to be fair, because forensic analysis without balance is just propaganda, and this channel does not do propaganda. There is a version of the story where Drake pulls a rabbit out of a hat. There is a version where he announces a global run tomorrow morning, prints a graphic in Iceman blue, drops a Miami date, drops a Toronto homecoming, drops a New York tonight, drops an LA closer. And the entire narrative I just walked you through evaporates like breath on cold glass. That version exists. That version is possible. Drake is Drake. He has more tools in his arsenal than any of us can see from the outside. But the longer he waits, the harder that version becomes to execute. Because every additional day of silence is another day his own fans move from patient to skeptical to insulted. And insulted fans do not queue at midnight. Insulted fans do not fight for floor seats. Insulted fans stay home, refresh Kendrick's Instagram, and wait for the next grand national run. Drake does not have the luxury of testing that patience much longer. And the internet, the very internet Drake helped shape, is turning on him in a way that is genuinely fascinating to watch in real time. His most vocal defenders are exhausted. His mid-tier fans are cracking jokes. His casual listeners are drifting to Sexy Red and Sabrina Carpenter and Bryson Tiller and Kehlani and every other name currently occupying the space he used to own by default. And the Kendrick Lamar audience, the audience Drake once tried to convert, once tried to overlap with, once tried to poach, is standing on the other side of the fence pointing and laughing. Because for them, this Iceman drought is not a business problem. This Iceman drought is a vibe check. And Drake, whether he wants to admit it or not, is failing the vibe check in front of the entire world. Loosen your grip on the Drake mythology for one honest minute and ask yourself the question everybody is secretly asking. When was the last time Drake made a decision that felt culturally correct? Really think about it. When was the last time he moved in a way that the culture, not the charts, not the streams, not the algorithm, the actual culture, applauded him for? Because from where I am standing, that moment is further away than his defenders want to admit. And the Iceman rollout was supposed to be the answer. Iceman was supposed to reset the temperature. Iceman was supposed to remind the world that Drake could still choreograph a moment better than anybody else in the room. And instead, Iceman is turning into a case study on how not to launch an era. Because the album dropped, the discourse peaked in a weekend, the singles started to slide, and now the man himself is missing from the conversation about his own project. Missing. That is the word. Drake is missing from Iceman. And when the star is missing from their own moment, the moment starts belonging to someone else. Let me tell you exactly what a healthy Drake tour rollout would have looked like, so that we can measure how badly this one has already deviated. A healthy Drake rollout announces the tour within 7 to 14 days of the album drop. A healthy Drake rollout drops a graphic in the album's color palette. A healthy Drake rollout debuts one new song live at a surprise pop-up in a random city and lets that footage detonate on TikTok. A healthy Drake rollout leaks the openers strategically, one at a time, to keep the news cycle occupied for the full week leading up to the on-sale. A healthy Drake rollout offers a fan presale that rewards longtime supporters with the front rows before scalpers can touch them. And a healthy Drake rollout closes with a Miami residency at Hard Rock Stadium, because if The Weeknd can do it, Drake absolutely can attempt it. That is the blueprint. That is the checklist. That is the rubric. And Drake, so far, has completed 0 of those checkpoints. 0. Not 1. Not even a graphic. And the longer that 0 sits at 0, the more his silence starts to look less like strategy and more like paralysis. And here is the part that is going to sting the diehards, because it needs to be said out loud. Drake is not too big to fail. He never was. The size of a star is measured in the willingness of an audience to keep showing up, and the audience is currently showing up for other people. That is not opinion. That is not shade. That is measurable data across streaming, ticketing, and cultural conversation. When Kendrick announces a run, the run sells. When SZA announces a run, the run sells. When Sabrina Carpenter announces a run, the run sells in 90 seconds. When Drake announces a run, in the current climate, nobody is 100% sure what happens. And that uncertainty, that ambiguity, that question mark, is the exact reason he has not announced anything. Because a Drake tour that undersells becomes a Drake tour that trends for the wrong reason. And Drake, more than anybody, understands the difference between trending because you won and trending because you lost. Now, the wild card in all of this, the one thing that could genuinely flip this entire script back in his favor, is a surprise guest strategy. Drake could, in theory, walk out and announce Iceman dates with a rotating cast of surprise features, city by city. A Future night in Atlanta. A Chris Brown night in LA. A Party Next Door night in Toronto. A Sexy Red night in St. Louis. A Vibes Cartel night in Miami. A carefully scripted rotation of high-value features that turns each stop into an event nobody wants to miss, because you cannot predict who is coming out. That would generate the kind of ticket velocity that a normal announcement cannot generate anymore. But even that strategy requires goodwill from the featured artists, and goodwill toward Drake in the current climate is a scarce resource. Because everybody in the industry is watching the same scoreboard. Everybody in the industry knows what PG Lang is building. Everybody in the industry knows the direction the culture has been moving. And nobody with real leverage wants to be photographed on the losing side of that direction. So the guest strategy exists, but the executability of the guest strategy is shrinking every week Drake sits on his hands. I have been in this rap coverage space for years. I have watched artists rise, fall, reset, and rise again. And what I am watching right now with Drake feels categorically different from anything I have seen from him before. Because this is not the Drake who spent months plotting a comeback record in a bunker. This is not the Drake who dropped a surprise EP just because the mood struck him. This is not the Drake who used to hop on Instagram at 3 in the morning to leak his own snippets for fun. This is a Drake who feels heavy. Who feels tired. Who feels burdened by the size of his own catalog and the expectations that catalog created. And when a superstar starts to feel heavy in front of their audience, the audience notices, whether the superstar wants them to or not. That heaviness is on every recent post. It is in the pacing of his captions. It is in the length of the gaps between his uploads. It is in the tone of his voice on the album itself. Iceman, when you listen to it front to back, sounds like a man who does not want to be doing this anymore. And the fans, for the first time, are hearing it. That is why the tour matters. That is why the silence matters. Because the tour would answer the question the album refused to answer. Is Drake still in this? Is Drake still hungry? Is Drake still willing to do the physical, exhausting, 7 nights a week grind of a real superstar campaign? And every day he does not announce a tour is a day the answer to that question tilts 1 more inch toward no. Meanwhile, you cannot even talk about Drake without acknowledging what Kendrick Lamar is doing on the exact opposite side of the aisle. Kendrick is running laps. Kendrick is stacking wins. Kendrick is expanding into film, into fashion, into NBA partnerships, into PG Lang media ventures, into an entire empire that does not require him to be photographed every 12 hours to prove he still exists. Kendrick's absence from the internet is now interpreted as strength. Drake's absence from the internet is interpreted as weakness. That is a full cultural inversion, and it happened in the span of 18 months. Kendrick's silence sells albums. Drake's silence sells doubt. Kendrick's silence sells out stadiums. Drake's silence right now is not selling anything. It is just sitting there, taking up space, waiting for somebody to explain it. And nobody at OVO seems to have a good explanation ready. For the fans reading between the lines, this is the moment you have to make a real decision. Are you going to keep waiting on a tour that may not come? Are you going to keep saving that $800 in a shoebox under your bed? Are you going to keep refreshing Drake's Instagram at midnight for a graphic that keeps not arriving? Or are you going to redirect that energy toward artists who are actually giving you a reason to show up? Because the culture has moved. The culture is moving. The culture is not going to wait on Drake to figure out his rollout. And the longer Drake stays frozen, the longer the culture keeps drifting, and the harder it becomes for him to catch back up to where he used to sit by default. That is not disrespect. That is physics. That is momentum. That is the way the industry has always worked, and it is not going to bend around Drake just because his Wikipedia page says he is the most streamed artist on the planet. Ask yourself this, and be honest. If Drake announces the Iceman tour tomorrow, are you first in line or are you skeptical? Because 2 years ago, that question did not exist. 2 years ago, every Drake fan was first in line by default. Every Drake fan pre-saved, pre-ordered, pre-booked, pre-purchased. Every Drake tour was an assumption, not a decision. And the fact that skepticism now exists inside his own fan base, the fact that his own fans are publicly acknowledging that they do not know if he will really show up, is the biggest cultural shift Drake has faced in his entire career. Bigger than the Kendrick beef. Bigger than the ghostwriting era. Bigger than any of the individual internet cycles that have crashed into his brand over the years. Because those cycles came from the outside. This shift is coming from the inside. And nothing kills a superstar faster than an internal audience that starts asking questions the artist cannot answer. Freeze the world. That is the phrase somebody floated as a potential tour name, and honestly, it might be the most accurate accidental branding of Drake's current era anybody has come up with. Because that is exactly what Drake looks like he is trying to do. Freeze the world. Freeze the conversation. Freeze the timeline. Freeze the expectations. Just freeze everything until he figures out what he wants to do next. But the world does not freeze for anybody, not even Drake. The world keeps moving. Kendrick keeps moving. SZA keeps moving. Sexy Red keeps moving. Bryson Tiller keeps moving. Sabrina Carpenter keeps moving. The Weeknd keeps moving. And every second Drake spends frozen is a second the rest of the industry uses to widen the gap. You cannot pause the culture, no matter how many albums you have. You cannot pause the culture, no matter how many streams you have. You cannot pause the culture, no matter how big your fan base used to be. And the sooner OVO accepts that, the sooner Drake can maybe start plotting a real recovery. Here is my honest, unfiltered prediction on what happens next, and I want everybody in the comments to tell me if you agree or if you think I am completely wrong on this one. Drake announces a tour before the end of the current quarter. That announcement will be an arena tour, not a stadium tour, and OVO will spin it as an intentional intimate choice rather than a demand-driven downgrade. That tour will sell in the major markets: Toronto, New York, LA, Miami, Atlanta, Chicago, and struggle in the secondary markets, particularly the mid-sized Midwestern and Southern cities that used to sell out for him without a second thought. Drake will attempt to compensate with a rotating cast of surprise features, and one of those features will accidentally trend for the wrong reason. The tour will be branded as a triumphant Iceman victory lap by his most loyal fans, and simultaneously as a quiet retreat by his critics. Both will be partially correct. And by the time the tour wraps, the conversation will have already moved on to whatever Kendrick Lamar or SZA or Sabrina Carpenter is doing next. That is not shade. That is a forecast. And forecasts, when they are honest, sting. But here is the meta question I want to leave in the room, the one I want you to argue about in the comments until this video hits the algorithm the way it deserves to hit the algorithm. Is Drake actually done at the top of hip-hop, or is he simply reinventing what the top of hip-hop looks like on his own terms, and everybody is misreading it as decline? Because both narratives are being sold to you right now by different corners of the internet. One corner is telling you Drake has entered a graceful, mature, business-first era where touring matters less and streaming matters more. The other corner is telling you Drake is a superstar in free fall who has run out of moves. And the truth, as it usually is probably somewhere between the two, but leaning uncomfortably toward one of them more than the other. So which one is it? Which corner do you fall in? Because how you answer that question tells us more about where hip-hop is headed in the next 12 months than any album that is coming out between now and then. When the smoke clears on this era, and it will clear, either through a triumphant tour announcement that reshuffles the deck or through a continued silence that hardens into permanent decline, the story of Iceman will not be about the album itself. It will be about this exact stretch. It will be about the month Drake had to say something and said nothing. It will be about the fans who typed their pleas into the void. It will be about the boycott that either came back or never fully went away. It will be about the tour that either happened, or the tour that ghosted the country that raised him. And it will be about the quiet, uncomfortable moment the culture finally realized that Drake is no longer the default, no longer the assumption, no longer the finish line every other artist has to sprint toward. He is one of the runners now, and the runners have to prove themselves every lap. So drop a comment. Tell me your city. Tell me if you would still buy a floor seat at $800, or if that number has quietly become too much. Tell me who you would want on the tour if he does announce it. Tell me if the US boycott, in your opinion, is real, imagined, or already over. Tell me if you think Iceman is a great album that is being dragged down by a bad rollout, or a mid-album that is being propped up by loyalty. Tell me everything, because this is the exact kind of conversation that pushes videos like this one directly into the timelines they need to reach. And if you made it all the way to this line, you're the exact kind of listener this channel was built for. You're the kind of person who does not stop at the headline. You're the kind of person who wants the full autopsy. And I promise you, this Iceman story is only just getting started, because the next chapter, the one nobody is talking about yet, is going to make everything you just watched look like the warm-up round. Now let me put another dimension on this whole conversation, because we have been dancing around it and it deserves its own moment. Drake's brand as a live entity has always been built on the promise that he is the most reliable box office name in modern rap. Reliable. That word matters. Reliable meant that if Drake announced a date, that date sold. Reliable meant that if Drake said he was coming to your city, you did not need to double-check the schedule. Reliable meant that Drake would show up, do the 2-hour set, run through the hits, hit the deep cuts, bring out a surprise guest, and leave the arena feeling like a religious experience. That is what the Drake brand meant for over 10 straight years. And reliability in the touring business is worth more than talent. Reliability is what allows promoters to greenlight stadium tours. Reliability is what allows Ticketmaster to build dynamic pricing tiers around your name. Reliability is what allows Live Nation to justify 8-figure guarantees. And the second Drake stopped being reliable, the second the Sexy Songs for You tour never showed up, the second the Iceman dates started ghosting, the entire economic architecture that props up his live business started to crack from the inside. Because promoters have long memories. Ticketmaster has long memories. Live Nation has long memories. And the industry conversation about Drake right now is not about his talent, is not about his catalog, is not about his stream count. The industry conversation about Drake right now is about whether he can still be trusted to deliver. And that conversation is happening in rooms Drake will never sit in, at meetings Drake will never attend, on spreadsheets Drake will never see. Zoom the lens out and look at what this Iceman silence means for OVO. OVO is not just Drake. OVO is a label, a fashion brand, a Toronto exporter, a pipeline of artists like Party Next Door and Roy Woods who depend on Drake's biggest moments. Every Drake tour used to be a launchpad. When Drake stops touring, OVO stops eating. If Drake does not tour Iceman in America, the Toronto pipeline he spent 15 years building loses its dinner table. And there is one more angle I need to put on the record before we close this out, because if I do not say it out loud, somebody in the comments is going to say it for me. Drake's absence from touring is starting to feel personal, not just professional. Personal in the sense that Drake, at this stage of his career, may have already made the internal decision that he does not need touring the way touring needs him. Personal in the sense that a man who owns his masters, who owns his publishing, who owns his brand equity, who has real estate portfolios and streaming residuals and hospitality investments and cannabis lines, may have quietly done the math and decided that the physical, exhausting, criticism-inviting nature of a full tour is no longer worth the return. And if that is the calculation Drake has made, that is his right. That is a legitimate business decision. That is a mature superstar choice. But he owes his fans the honesty of saying it out loud. He owes his American fanbase the courtesy of confirming, publicly, that the domestic touring era of his career may be over, or scaled down, or reshaped into something smaller and more selective. Because right now, by staying silent, Drake is letting his fans hold their breath and their bank accounts hostage on the hope of a tour that may never come. And that, whether he means it or not, is a form of disrespect. Silence, when the audience is begging, is a form of disrespect. And Drake, of all people, should know better. Roll straight into the suggested video on your screen right now, because I just broke down the exact moment Kendrick Lamar's next move quietly changed the entire touring landscape for the rest of this generation. And it directly explains why Drake is stuck exactly where he is stuck. If you want the other half of the story, that is where you go. Do not close the tab. Do not swipe away. Just click the next one. It is already loaded. It is already waiting. And I will see you there.